TDS, as the name suggests, tax deduction at source. So before we enter into the nitty-gritties of this TDS concept, we have to understand the logic that as per the Income Tax Act, any year starting from the 1st April and ending on the 31st March, and the income of which is to be taxed is known as the previous year. So it is a period of 12 months for which whatever income you're generating is liable to be taxed. But the point is that this tax is paid cumulatively in the year to come. So the period, that is the year subsequent to such year in which the tax is paid, is what you call the assessment year. And why we use the word assessment here? Because assessment denotes the calculation of the income, the calculation of the tax, and the payment of the tax. So the assessment will be completed only when you have correctly calculated your income, you have correctly calculated your tax, and most importantly, the tax has been duly paid. Now, the primary focus here is that though the income is generated, for example, if we take that the period is April 22 to March 23, that is the current period, and we normally write it in short as 22-23. So, the primary focus here is कि आप इनकम तो जनरेट कर रहे हैं 2022-23 में और उसका टैक्स जाकर देंगे अगले साल. तो मनी कभी फ्री तो होती नहीं है. देयर इज ऑलवेज अ टाइम वैल्यू ऑफ मनी. दैट इज, जो ये पैसा आपके पास पड़ा हुआ है जिसके ऊपर आपने टैक्स गवर्नमेंट को देना था, वो एक तरीके से गवर्नमेंट के रेवेन्यू है. तो गवर्नमेंट उस पैसे को एक साल लेट क्यों ले? और अगर आप थोड़ा सा आप रफ एस्टिमेट भी लगाओगे तो लगभग एक साल के टैक्स की जो कलेक्शन है ना, वो 10 लाख के आगे ना करोड़ लगा लो. यानी कि 7 जीरो तो आपके करोड़ की हैं और 6 जीरो ये वाली हैं. तो इतना लगभग एक साल में आप डायरेक्ट टैक्स पे करते हो. और अगर एक साल का 12% पर एनम का एक नॉर्मल रेट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट जो आप एक्सपेक्ट करते हो, और अगर बैंक की एफडी का भी 6% लेके चलेंगे, तो लगभग लगभग 60,000 करोड़ रुपए गवर्नमेंट का इंटरेस्ट का नुकसान हो जाएगा. लगभग छोटे छोटे स्टेट्स के बजट के बराबर है. यानी कि एक छोटा सा स्टेट दिल्ली उत्तराखंड जैसा, अगर ये टैक्स लेट आ रहा है और टाइम पे आ जाए, तो उसके ब्याज से काम चल जाएगा. सो गवर्नमेंट कैन नॉट बी डूइंग सच फुलिश थिंग्स वेयर दे विल अलाउ यू टू पे टैक्स 1 year late. So government devises primarily two ways where during the previous year itself you pay tax on certain estimated or fixed basis. And once this tax has been collected, then when you will go to the assessment year, you will calculate your actual tax liability. And from this actual tax liability, whatever this tax that has been paid during the previous year will be deducted. And if somehow you tend to be on a side where you have paid more taxes, then there will be not just the refund, but also you will be given the interest. But if the actual tax is more, then you will be liable to pay the balance. Plus, also, like you have so proudly received the interest, then you will also be liable to pay interest subject to the conditions and the provisions. So, what we are focusing is that the ways of depositing tax with the government on an estimation during the previous year are primarily of two kinds. One is what you call the advance payment of tax, but this advance payment of tax is self assessment in the sense कि आपको खुद अपनी liability anticipate करनी है. And before we enter into the advance tax, which we'll be discussing in the sessions to come, the more important and efficient way of collecting is the tax deducted at source. And we also have this word tax collected at source. So we can have either the TDS or the TCS, which conceptually are one and the same thing. And here we will be focusing on the TDS, and the provisions are primarily from section 192, section 193, and various provisions of Section 194 starting from Section 194A. तो 194 194A से लेकर बहुत सारे सेक्शंस हैं 194A 194B 194BB C D DD. So there are so many sections which will accrue and we will be discussing quite a few of them. So what this word TDS justifies, and let me take an example if you allow, कि भाई अगर आप एम्प्लॉय हो और ऑब्वियस सी बात है कि आपका एम्प्लॉयर आपके सर्विसेज के बदले आपको सैलरी दे रहा है तो गवर्नमेंट believes that though you may have other incomes in addition to salary, but because you are a salaried employee, your primary source of income is salary, which is in the hands of the employer in the sense that employer knows how much amount you are going to receive. So then why to wait for the next year for you to calculate your salary on your own and deposit the tax? Why not put a duty on such employer that when this salary is paid to the employee, then you make an estimation of your annual salary. So as per the salary laws, you will calculate the taxable salary of the employee and you will calculate the tax payable because he will always be an individual then as per the tax rates. And if possible, you can always ask the employee whether he is paying any rent so that any deduction on account of HRA or ATGG can be provided, or whether he is receiving any other kind of interest, then that income can be added, or if he is having any housing loan, then that benefit of Section 24B regarding interest payment, or regarding Section 80C regarding principal repayment, or any other investment that he is making to be covered under the section of 80C, or any other tax saving scheme under deduction or exemption that he is planning to claim in the future, then he, as an employee, should disclose such things to the employer. An employer will try to take almost all those things into his consideration, and then he will calculate his taxable income. And whatever the taxable income will be, we will calculate the tax payable on such amount, and that tax payable will not be waited for the employee to be paid in the next assessment year coming. Instead, this tax payable will be deducted from the salary payable to employee. यानी कि जो ये टैक्स बनेगा जब आप उस एम्प्लॉय को सैलरी पे करेंगे तो वेट नहीं करेंगे कि भाई जब वो सैलरी मिलेगी तब जाके आप अपनी इनकम असेसमेंट करना फिर आप टैक्स पे करना इंस्टेड कि अगर हमें लगता है कि फॉर एग्जांपल अगर पूरे साल में 5 लाख रुपए की सैलरी बनती है और आपका 20,000 रुपए टैक्स बनता है तो 20,000 रुपए काट के पैसे मिलेंगे दैट इज वाई द टैक्स हैज बीन डिडक्टेड एट द सोर्स तो हेयर दिस एम्प्लॉयर डिनोट्स द सोर्स and that source is deducting your tax and paying to the government. So what the concept of TDS says that government identifies the source, ask him that whenever a certain payment is made to the recipient, then irrespective, either in the case of salary, you calculate his actual total income and calculate the actual tax and deduct that tax and pay it to the government. And that is why this section 192 is a primary section on TDS on salary, and it is special from other sections because in this section, effectively, actual tax liability is calculated of the employee subject to the declarations made by the employee, and the actual tax liability in the assessment year may vary only if there is some unplanned or income or saving for the employee which has not been declared to the employer during the previous year. And if that is not the case, then whatever is or whatever will be the actual tax payable by the employee will be deducted by the employer, that is the source, and that will be paid to the government. Whereas when we will discuss the other sections like section 193, 194, etc., then in other sections in the to come, we are not concerned with the actual income. That is, whenever the source makes a payment to the recipient and this payment is more than a minimum threshold limit, then a fixed percentage known as the TDS rate will be deducted. Known as the TDS rate will be deducted. For example, if I take the example of Section 193, which deals with the interest on securities, so we have fixed a threshold limit of 5,000 or 10,000 depending upon the nature of the security. For example, for debentures it is 5,000, for saving accounts it is 10,000, for FDs it is 10,000. So we can always learn those sources. But it may happen that Mr. X could have received an annual interest on fixed deposits of rupees 2 lakhs. But if you see the actual tax rate, then being an individual, he is subjected to exemption limit of 2 lakh 50,000, where this income of 2 lakhs will not be taxed and therefore the tax liability will be nil in actual. But what this section 193 is getting, that irrespective of the actual taxable income of the recipient, the source while making the payment, if this payment exceeds the threshold limit, which in this example is say 10,000, so because this amount of 2 lakhs is more than 10,000, so the whole amount of 2 lakhs would have been subjected to a fixed TDS rate, which as per section 193 is say 10%. So this 20,000 will be the TDS deducted for Mr. X. So what will happen that if Mr. X does not have any tax liability because his income is not exceeding the exemption limit, so the liability is nil, but because there is a TDS already deducted, so in the end of the assessment year, Mr. X will get a refund of 20,000 and not just the refund but also the interest thereon. Similarly, if Mr. X has certain other incomes, for example, his total incomes comes out to be 10 lakhs and his total tax comes out to be 35,000, then he will be given the benefit of this TDS of 20,000 and then he will pay this 15,000 plus any interest if payable, and that is why whatever the tax was deducted, that was based on three factors. So other than section 192, all other sections depend upon that what is the nature of income. So what this chapter wants you to learn, that except section 192, which is based on almost actual tax liability of the salaried employee based on the declarations, and only way the actual tax will be different from the TDS deducted if there is any variation or there is a non-declaration from the employee or there is an income which has come as a windfall gain or any other unplanned saving has come into the play. Otherwise, Section 192 will ensure actual tax deducted as tax. Whereas in all other sections, we have to understand three things, that each section will cover a specific nature of the income. There will always be a specific threshold limit to remember. That is, each section with each nature of income will be subjected to TDS. That is, the source will deduct tax from the payment made to the recipient dependent upon the specific section threshold limit. And thirdly, there will be a specific rate of TDS. So government has tried quite hard to rationalize these TDS rates, and normally in most of the cases the TDS stands at the rate 10%, but that is not a universal law. It can be any other as per the nature specific payment, any other rate. So primary focus as per the concept is has already been discussed, and now the focus will shift to that which nature of section will cover which nature of income and what is the threshold limit and what is the rate of the TDS. So if I say that in addition to section 193, if I take another section 194, then you will see that this section 194 is a TDS on dividend. If you see That is specific section 193 dealt with the interest on securities. But if I come to section 194, then it's a specific payment of TDS on dividend. So the payment character is dividend. The threshold limit here has been fixed at rupees 5,000 and the TDS rate has been fixed at the rate 10%. So it means if you are receiving a TDS of less than 5,000, then there will not be any TDS deducted. But if the amount of TDS is 5,000 or more, then there will be a TDS of 10%. For example, अगर आपको 8,000 रुपये डिविडेंड मिला तो 800 रुपये TDS कट जाएगा और आपको 7,200 रुपीज मिलेंगे। तो ये जो 8,000 रुपये है जो आपका डिविडेंड था, दैट इज व्हाट यू कॉल ग्रॉस। 800 रुपये TDS कटा एट द रेट 10%, तो ये 8,000 रुपये दोबारा लिख रहा हूं मैं कि आपका ग्रॉस डिविडेंड था। और ये 7,200 that will be known as your net dividend income here. So if the dividend is exempt, then it's okay. But if the dividend is to be decided whether it is taxable or not, because ideally gross dividends received up to rupees 1 lakh will be exempt and the extra will be taxable as per the latest income tax laws. So when we will calculate this gross dividend to decide the taxability, then this net has to be converted into gross, and this gross will be a part of the head, and that head will be income from other sources. So this gross will be equal to net multiplied by 100 divided by 100 minus TDS percentage. So in this case, if the question says, the data says that a mixture X has received 7,200 as net dividend after TDS, then it will be the figure 8,000 that will be included while calculating the GTI under the head other sources. Similarly, if I now move on to the concept of section where we have to learn the various sections. So in addition to section 194, if we move to section 194A, then this section 194A is like section 193, but in 193 there were interest on securities, where in 194A there is interest, which is interest other than interest on security. So the interest incomes which have not been covered under section 193 will be covered under section 194, and dependent upon the nature of the interest and the recipient. For example, for senior citizens, the threshold limit is 50,000. For others, the threshold limit is say 40,000. But the TDS rate is again at the rate 10%. Similarly, if we move to the section 194B and the section 194BB, so this is the TDS on winnings from horse races, and this is the TDS on winnings from lotteries, crossword puzzles, games, etc. So what I am trying to underline, that the concept of TDS must be understood, but in addition to that, you also have to learn specifically four things: the relevant section, the nature of the payment, the threshold limit, and the percentage. And that is what will be used in the practical questions to come in your exam. So, just to focus on this last case here, and then I expect that you will learn the balance sections and use it for exam benefits. So, if we see why I'm taking this, that these kind of incomes, winning from lottery, crossword puzzles, games, or the winning from the horse races, etc., they are what you call casual or windfall gains. And such are a special income which are normally taxed at the rate 30%. And they don't enjoy any exemption limit. So, what has been said here, that if there is any such income, then if the threshold limit of 10,000 is breached, so the breach of 10,000, तो अगर आप नोटिस करेंगे केवीसी में, तो जो पहला पड़ाव है वो 10,000 पे आता है। वो 10,000 का पड़ाव इसलिए आता है कि जो लोग 10,000 बिना कमाए निकल गए, उनका टीडीएस काटने की जरूरत नहीं है। वो जितने पैसे कमाएंगे, 2,000, 4,000, 5,000, 10,000, वो पूरा का पूरा पैसा बिना टीडीएस के लेके चले जाएंगे। लेकिन जैसे ही पहला पड़ाव पूरा हुआ, जिन लोगों की इनकम 10,000 से ऊपर चली गई, तो दे विल नाउ बी कवर्ड बाय सेक्शन 194B because they will have the winning from the games. And because the amount is now more than 10,000, then that will be subjected to the actual tax which is liable on such income, that is at the rate 30%. तो अगर आपको लगता है कि एक आदमी ने 50 लाख रुपए जीते, तो वो 50 लाख रुपए लेके नहीं गया। उस 50 लाख रुपए के ऊपर 30% के हिसाब से 15 लाख रुपए टैक्स बनता है, सब्जेक्ट टू सरचार्ज एंड अदर सेसेस। और वो जो 15 लाख रुपए टैक्स उसको एक्चुअल पे करना है, वो सोर्स वो केबीसी कंपनी है जो उन्हें गेम खिला रही है। तो वो जो सोर्स है, केबीसी कंपनी के ओनर्स, वो उस टैक्स को काट के पेमेंट करते हैं। व्हेन द अमिताभ बच्चन शोज दैट पेमेंट आपके अकाउंट में चली गई, so that is just a dramatic representation, because that tax has to be deducted, because it is not voluntary that the source has to deduct the TDS. It is the compulsory duty of the source to deduct the TDS, and if the source, and in this case the company, fails to deduct the TDS on the eligible payment which is subjected to TDS, then the penalty and the interest can be levied upon such payer. So it is not possible कि अगर अमिताभ बच्चन ने कहा कि भाई आपने पेमेंट ट्रांसफर हो गई, दैट इज पॉसिबल बिकॉज द पेमेंट विल बी डिडक्टेड, और सॉरी आई शुड से द टीडीएस विल डिडक्टेड एट द रेट 30%। तो अगर 50 लाख की पेमेंट है तो 15 लाख रुपए टैक्स कटेगा, और 35 लाख रुपए ही आपके अकाउंट में आए। And now I will take the last session, last topic for the last section for the day, that is 194G. And why this is being discussed? Because this is a TDS on professional fees. So for people like us who are providing their professional services, we are subjected to this TDS. So if I say myself, Deepak Gupta, and I have been providing professional services to any recipient recipient of my services. So as per GST, I become a supplier, and if I'm registered, then I will charge the GST on such value of supply and deposit it with the government of India. But when this recipient provides me this value of the supply, then this value of supply becomes a kind of payment for me. And if this payment is more than or equal to 30,000, then irrespective of whether I have any tax liability or not, there will be a TDS deduction. So the threshold limit here is 30,000, and the TDS has been fixed at the rate 10% per annum. So when myself Deepak Gupta providing professional services on behalf of our platform College Dekho here, so if and when the payment starts exceeding 30,000, this recipient of our services and the source in our case will start deducting, has started deducting, I should say, TDS at the rate 10% of all the payment that has been made, because the source, the payer is under an obligation to deduct TDS, and if we default, then they may be subjected to liability and the interest, which they don't want to accept and entertain, and why should they? And therefore, payments like us are subjected to 194J. So the all payments to the chartered accountants, advocates, and teachers and all such professional technical services will be covered under section 194J, irrespective of the tax liability. There will be a TDS at the rate 10%, and so we can carry on with this sections list of TDS, but the concept will always remain same, that on section, yeah, as per section 192, the TDS on salary will more or less will be on the actual tax calculated as per the slab rates. But whereas in the other sections, the TDS will be based on that if the payment, irrespective of the actual income being earned, if the payment exceeds the threshold limit, then a fixed percentage will be deducted irrespective of the actual tax liability.